Do you spend hours in your head thinking about something that happened, could have happened, or might happen? Do you ask others what to do so you don't make a mistake? Welcome to the Playing It Safe podcast. I am Dr. Z, your host. I am a clinical psychologist, an author, and a person that is super passionate about sharing with you science-based skills to overcome any type of fear-based struggles. Who doesn't experience fear? Who doesn't play it safe? In this show, we will discuss how fear-based reactions happen in day-to-day life, how playing it safe behaviors look like, sound like, and feel like, how you can put into action solid tips from behavioral science to get unstuck from worries, fears, obsessions, and anxieties, and how you can start doing what works, what matters, and what you care about. Behavioral science doesn't have to be boring. Thanks for listening, and let's get started. Picture this scenario. Out of the blue, you face an ambiguous and uncertain situation, and of course, you quickly try to solve it. You anticipate all types of scenarios and try to prepare for each one of them in your head. Without realizing, you are worrying and consumed with anxiety. Worry is primarily a thought-based process, and that's what makes it tricky. We all worry from time to time. It's unavoidable. But playing it safe by worrying all the time can take a hefty toll on your well-being, happiness, and relationships. In this episode, I interview Dr. Lejeune. We discuss the subtleties of worrying, what keeps worry cycles, and the importance of developing a new relationship with your mind. In the second part of the interview, I share with Chad an unexpected situation I encountered, and we use that as an opportunity to discuss micro skills to manage uncertainty, what-if thoughts, reassurance-seeking, and information-seeking behaviors. I really hope you find this episode helpful, and I want to encourage you to subscribe to the newsletter Playing It Safe, so you are the first one to know when new episodes are released, new blog posts are published, upcoming online courses, and discounts. Every Wednesday, I share with all of you new resources to stop blindly playing it safe so you can start doing more of what really matters to you. To subscribe to the newsletter Playing It Safe, you need to go to my website, www.thisisdrz.com. I wish you a great day and see you next week. Bye-bye. You have been working with anxiety for quite a while by now. And what I'm hoping in this episode is to learn more about your take and your approach and how you deliver ACT skills, acceptance and commitment therapy skills in the treatment of worry. So let me start by asking the first question. For people who don't know much about worry or don't know too much about anxiety, how would you define worry these days? How would you explain to them what worry is and how they can catch worry?
That's a really great question. And it's really what I start with my patients in that, what's tricky about worry is it's thought-based. And we think all the time. We're constantly thinking. Even when we're sleeping, we are thinking, right? When we're dreaming. And so there's a tendency to treat all of our thoughts equally, right? And being able to identify and define thoughts that are not helpful, right, is very important. And so having a clear definition of worry or obsession, right, is very critical. And I think that if an individual is not able to notice that they are worrying, then they're not going to be able to do anything else about it, right? It's the first step, right? And so I have a very sort of functional definition of worry, in that worry is by definition non-productive, right? And that nothing actually is coming out of the thought process other than anxiety, right? So the thing is that it's very helpful to think about the future, right? That's part of our success as a species, is that we can imagine the future and predict future events, and that's great. And so a useful way to do that, a couple of useful ways. One is planning, right? We can anticipate and plan for the future. The other thing is sort of problem solving. We have a difficulty, we can roll over the problem, look at it from different angles, and imagine possible solutions to that problem. So these things are both very productive. And so if we're, actually planning or problem solving, at the end of that process, we have a plan or we have a list of possible solutions, right? So there's output to the process, and that's what makes it productive. Worry, so sort of by definition, it can look a lot like planning and problem solving because we're thinking about the future, we're going over it, from different perspectives, right? But there's nothing coming out of the process, right? So I like to use the metaphor of, if you have a 3-year-old who wants to make cookies, and he or she goes into the kitchen and grabs the big mixing bowl and pours some flour in there, and maybe pours some milk in there and dumps a bunch of sugar in there and kind of blends it all up, and it gets all over the kitchen. And you walk in and you say, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" Right? And the child says, "I'm making cookies," right? Unless cookies come out of that process, in fact, this kid is not making cookies, right? It feels like it, it looks like it, right?
Yes.
But we need to be able to define a process by the outcome, right? And so a good way to notice is if you're worrying versus problem solving or planning is if you take a piece of paper and you sort of jot down what's going on, right, in this process. At the end, if you have a plan or you have some possible solutions, then you've been planning or problem solving. But if at the end, you're more upset than you were when you started, you've probably just been worrying, right? So the other way to kind of understand worry is it is thinking about the future, but also having fight or flight activation while that's going on, right? So it's actually responding to the process with more anxiety, right? So the thoughts, far from being helpful at helping you to protect yourself from future problems or to move forward in resolving something, the thoughts themselves become a trigger for more fearfulness.
That's right. That's right. I think one of the characteristics to catch worry is repetition, right? When we're thinking over and over about the same content without taking action, without doing anything about it, right? We get stuck in our heads.
Absolutely. It's sort of like if you, get into your car and you start the engine and then you put it in neutral and you just press on the gas for an hour and a half, right? Until the tank is empty, right? But you haven't gone anywhere, right? That's really what worry is all about, right? You can feel exhausted and depleted, but there's been no action associated with this process, right? And so it's, it's not helpful by definition at a minimum and can be even harmful.
Yeah, that is true. I think it can be exhausting. It can be debilitating. You feel tired. You may have mental fatigue. Now, sometimes people have these beliefs about worry. I may hear things like, if I don't worry about something bad happening, I won't be prepared. Worry helps me to be prepared. Worry helps me to cope with the unknown. How do you relate to those thoughts? We call them metacognitions. Within acceptance and commitment therapy, they're also known as ruling thoughts. They are rules about worry, and they are quite rigid. What skills do you teach clients when you hear things like that?
Right. So what I found to be really helpful is to sort of look at the sort of implicit assumption behind those beliefs, which is that there is a power in thinking itself, that thoughts have the ability to impact events in and of themselves. And so I think, what you're describing is sort of a superstitious belief that if I worry, that the worry itself will somehow inoculate me or prepare me or protect me from bad things, right? And so, people sort of become addicted to worry as almost a ritual that will magically protect them and safeguard them. And most rules, that govern the way we relate to our thoughts are very much about this sort of magical way of thinking. And so I like to sort of start with a conversation with people about sort of how our species has developed a relationship with our ability to think, right?
Yeah.
Our thoughts certainly have given us an edge, evolutionarily speaking. But because we sort of live in this duality, right? We have the experience of the outside world, of what we think of as reality, which involves our actions and their consequences, right? And we have the power to impact events in the world of reality. So I like to tell a story of, the early human, right, who has a goat in the meadow, and the goat is grazing in the meadow, and it's my favorite goat. I love this goat. And at night, when I'm sleeping, down the mountain in my hut, right, I think about the wolf that might come to the meadow and kill my goat. And when I imagine that wolf, it makes me very anxious, right? The thing is, though, that as I'm lying in my bed in my hut, the wolf is a thought. It's an inside wolf. It's not an outside wolf, right? But it makes me anxious anyway because I'm worried about my goat. And so in the middle of the night, I come from the hut, I run up the mountain to see if my goat is safe, right? And the goat is safe, right? And there's no wolf around, right? And so I feel better, right? And so what have I done, right? I've taken some action to protect my goat from this wolf that was only in my head to begin with, right?
That's right. It was a thought. It was a thought.
So eventually I decide, rather than getting out of the hut, I think what I'll do is I'll just think about the wolf and I'll say, wolf, wolf, go away, right? And I just imagine the wolf going away and then I feel better, right? And then I don't have to run up the hill, right? But I actually haven't really, done anything except get rid of the wolf in my head. Do you know what I mean? Right? So it can become very confusing, right? Where we can start to interact with our thoughts. And what we're really trying to do is to dispel the thought or the worry, but we're actually not addressing the reality. And maybe the reality doesn't even need to be addressed. So we lose a sense of where we can have actual impact, right? And so this, OCD is really, a ritual. So maybe I say, not by the hair of my chinny chin chin, right? And I say it 3 times and that gets rid of the wolf in my head, right? And this is how, we've developed sort of a sense of magic and superstition in our culture. It's all based on trying to control the real world by controlling our thoughts, right?
Yeah, which is very, very tricky, right? And that leads me to another question, Chad. I think behind all types of anxiety struggles, there is this very important skill, which is developing a new relationship with our mind. A relationship in which we don't take our thoughts seriously. We don't take our thoughts as the absolute truth. And I think you and I were on the same page around that, because if we take every single thought as the absolute truth, I will be every single night running to rescue the goat, right? Like every night, I will be super tired next day, because our mind will come up with all types of content, scary content, wonderful content, and all types of dangerous thoughts and dangerous images. As you're working with your clients, is there any other skill you teach them to develop this new relationship with their mind, so they don't hold their thoughts so much as the absolute truth and they don't become prisoners of all those thoughts and they don't feed into these worry loops?
Right. So you used a very important word there, which is relationship, right? Developing a new relationship with your mind. And that's really what the metacognitive focus is on, right? It's not about changing the thoughts. It makes sense for us to think about the wolf, right? And it's a risk, and we need to be able to think about risks, right? And the anxious mind is sort of programmed to think about risk, and it will continue to do that no matter what, right? So it's not about changing your mind, right?
Yeah.
It's about changing your relationship to those thoughts. The thing is, it takes a lot of humility to do this in some ways, because we really rely on our thoughts, and we identify with our thoughts as part of ourselves, right? This is me, right? This is what I'm thinking. And so I want to trust what I'm thinking. And so often that works for us, right? So I had the thought that I had an appointment with you this morning, and I opened my laptop, and here we are, right? So my thoughts help me most of the time, right? And so we're, most of my patients, they're a little uncomfortable with the idea of not trusting their own thoughts, right? And so I really try to focus on that relational aspect, in that, could you have a friend who is a good friend, who you trust and rely on, but who sometimes, gets worked up about things that are actually things that you don't really need to worry too much about, right? And can you sort of have a relationship with this friend where you like the friend and you rely on them, but you don't believe everything they say, and sometimes you just listen and say, well, I hear you, right? But I think it's okay, right? Is there room for, having this relationship with our thoughts where, we honor the thoughts, and we even say, I appreciate that you're concerned about me and my safety or my goat, right? This is great, right? But where we make decisions on how to act based on other information as well, right? Not just the opinion of this very dear friend, right? And so I think a lot of times, sort of framing it that way, it sidesteps having a struggling, sort of contentious relationship with our thoughts. So often with worry, the way worry becomes obsessing is that people are trying to talk themselves out of the worry, right? And that becomes a ritual. And so it becomes, this fight over what are the thoughts going to say? And if we can let go of that fight, and I'm going to let my thoughts say what they say. They say, the wolves are everywhere and the goat is just toast, right? Okay, but that's what they always say. And so I'm going to accept that's what they say. But I'm not going to run to the meadow every night, because that doesn't really work for me. I've got other things to do, right? And so I'm just going to have this sort of different relationship with this part of my mind that seems to be, overly concerned about the goat or the wolves, right? And so it sidesteps, having to change our thoughts, right? And it also, it helps us to get out of that loop of just, struggling to control, because the idea that we have to eliminate negative thoughts is, again, the buying into the idea that somehow our thoughts are so important and that they're going to affect reality.
That's right. I don't know where we learned that. I don't know where we learned that, right? That I can control reality with my mind, right?
And I think actually the field of psychology for a long time has fed into that, right? The idea of we must have positive thoughts, and it's really about changing your thinking and having a different attitude, and maybe not. Maybe it's not quite about that. Maybe it's a little more subtle.
That's right. Times have changed, right? Sometimes I think of our mind as this overly protective, nagging friend, right? That is constantly checking how we're doing, making sure that we're safe, making sure that we have everything. And it's constantly telling us, watch out. And we all have friends like that in our life. We also may have significant others like that in our life, right? So I think this idea of radically acknowledging that the mind will have that function in our life to be overly protective, sometimes more than other times, can really liberate us, right? Because we don't have to wrestle with that, but we can develop a harmonious relationship with this overly protective mind of ours. So I think that makes a huge difference, especially when dealing with worry. Now, will it be okay with you if I share a recent struggle I had? And maybe you can walk me through it.
I'm very intrigued.
Okay, so here's the situation. I went to the annual conference of the Acceptance and Commitment Therapy Association. This year was in Cyprus. And I was going back and forth between Cyprus and Greece. I was teaching workshops in different locations, super cool. But then guess what? My luggage got stuck in Athens. And I was in another island in Greece without my luggage for 4 days. So you can imagine, how I was.
Wow.
Totally unexpected. And I'm waiting like everyone for my luggage. I don't know, where's my luggage? Where is it? Where is it? It's coming. 1 hour passed by. When I went to check what happened, they tell me, well, your luggage is lost. Plain like that, right? Your luggage is lost.
It's lost. At least right? Now you know exactly where it is. It's lost. Okay, that helps.
Yes, I hear the words. My eyes got open. And the next word that comes out of my mouth is, what? Totally unexpected. Life comes with those moments, right? Unexpected, unplanned moments. And the woman says, well, you need to file a form, you need to file a report, and we will try to see what happened with the luggage. And all what I say again is, you will try to see what happened with the luggage? I'm like, you will try to see what happened. I had nothing besides the bag that I had with me, with my laptop, the iPad, a tiny bag of cosmetics, and that's it.
Wow.
That was it. I had nothing else. The charger for my laptop was in the luggage.
Oh, no. Goodness.
Tragedy. It was a Greek tragedy in the moment.
A Greek tragedy. I love it.
Greek tragedy, right? In the summer, in the midst of the summer. But here's where it comes interesting in terms of what our mind does. Of course, my mind starts running all types of scenarios. Will they find the luggage? How I'm going to get a new charger? What happened with the luggage? Can I teach my next workshop without a charger? What if they don't find the luggage when I have to leave this island? I have to go to my next destination. Do I need to change my ticket? And of course, I was feeling, quite anxious, right? Like my mind was just going on and on with all types of scenarios. So if you were next to me in that moment, and you can see what my mind is going through, what would you encourage me to do? How will you coach me through that moment? So people listening to us, they can get a sense of how they can use micro skills.
Right. So part of what is wonderful about the story, what's really interesting about it, is that there's mystery in this story, right? And in that, very often we don't have a lot of mystery in our lives, right? That we sort of know. So for example, I think this happens in particular when we're at home. You know that if you open this particular cabinet, you will find the cereal, right? And the coffee is over here, right? And the laundry detergent is in another room, right? There's no mystery. But when we leave that home and that realm of comfort, we're in control of so many things, and we go far away, we may find ourselves faced with the mystery. Well, where is, my laptop charger? It could be anywhere in the world.
Right? We know, right?
So this is ambiguity, right? This is uncertainty and the unknown. And whether we realize it or not, we deal with ambiguity every day, and we're dealing with it right now because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? I can tell you, I just planned recently in the past few weeks a trip to Maui, right? So, obviously I didn't know, right, what was going to happen the next day, right?
Right.
So we don't realize and we don't know that our life is full of mystery all the time, right? And so when someone says your luggage is lost, basically mystery has entered your life unexpectedly, right? And that the word lost means your luggage could be anywhere in the world, right? In other words, we don't know, right? So the anxious brain, right, has evolved to see ambiguity and uncertainty and the unknown as a threat and a danger, as it was at one time, right? We didn't know if we're walking in the forest and something's coming through the bushes, we don't know what it is. And if we don't know what it is, we're not going to be prepared for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So part of what's going on is your mind is trying to prepare for bad things that may happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. And that could actually be helpful. You're sort of having certain thoughts where you're trying to solve this puzzle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one response to that mystery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is to prepare for eventualities, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what if they they don't find my luggage by the time I go to my next destination? Do I need to change my ticket, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can I charge my laptop, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are productive thoughts that these can lead to ways of solving this puzzle, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it's important to notice that those are helpful. And what can really help a lot is to pick up a pad and pencil and start to write some of these things down. And if there are questions that have
Mm-hmm.
answers that you can find, then these are useful
Mm-hmm.
thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
then what the mind also does with a mystery is it develops narratives, right, to fill in the space. So when we don't know what's going on, we try to come up with stories about it, right? And this
Mm-hmm.
is part of what's so entertaining in this golden era of streaming television about a Netflix series, right? So we're watching this show that has 10 episodes, and the reason we keep watching is because we want to know what's going to happen, right? It's
That's
a
right.
mystery, right? And so we have these narratives, right? Will the protagonist find his lover, right? And will they come together, or will the villain kill somebody, right? What's going to happen? And so our brain makes up stories, and
Mm-hmm.
that happens as well. So you have the lost luggage mystery, and so you might imagine that somewhere along the line, your luggage came open, and that the contents of your suitcase are spread out on a conveyor belt and maybe went to different countries. Perhaps
Mm-hmm.
some of your luggage is on one continent and some of your luggage is on another, right? Maybe your underwear ended up on the floor in some back room of an airport,
That's
right?
right.
There are all sorts of things that you could imagine happen, and it's normal for the brain to try to fill in the blanks, right? Because we want
Right.
to know what's the story, right?
Of course.
Those sort of things are not so helpful, right? What that's doing is creating more plot twist and
Yeah.
more anxiety and interest, which is wonderful if you're developing a Netflix series
That's
on
right.
your lost luggage, right? That other people might want to watch, but you're not going to find it entertaining or helpful, right? So I think it's a good way to make that distinction is when we are thinking about solving a puzzle that will give us ideas of actions we can take.
Mm-hmm.
That's productive problem solving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you need to problem solve when you lose your luggage. You need to come up with things to do
That's
to
right.
solve this very big problem. But when you're then imagining all the other bad things that might happen, or things that are, trying to guess what's going on with your luggage, you're probably going to come upon things to worry about that you really don't need to worry about, or that it's not going to help you to worry about.
That's
So I
right.
think having that in mind, am I coming up with narratives and stories, or am
Mm-hmm.
I coming up with possible solutions, right? So
Mm-hmm.
holding yourself accountable, again, it's about the outcome of that process of thought.
That's right. That's right. It gets tricky because our mind sometimes comes with these very coherent narratives, right? Just to fill the gaps, as you're saying, it has to make sense of the unknown. It has to come
Right.
up with a story that somehow makes sense. And the story can be really out there from what's really happening, right? And
Right.
holding into the story rigidly as the absolute truth, that also keep us stuck, right? Then we start worrying more and more. Let me ask a follow-up question. While I was waiting to know what was going on with my luggage, I did the best I could to move on with things and stay present, try to buy some things that I could. And I call a couple of times, and you call these lines and you hear a robot, and then you have to call again, right? And then you call again, and then you feel like a loser because you're calling again.
Waiting by the phone.
I know, waiting by the phone, drinking your 5 cups of coffee. While I was doing all that, I knew that there was so much I could do. I have to call fill out the report, check the email to see if they have the report. I needed to find a charger for the laptop or borrow a charger or buy a charger. Then the rest of the time I have to figure out how do I go to the next hour, the next activity. I was very clear, right? There are things we have control of. There are things we don't have control of. Far from ideal, right? But life is about living. It's not about getting stuck in our head. But one of the behaviors that keeps people stuck with worrying is excessive information seeking. They are Googling, they are calling, they're asking others, what should I do? What will you advise if people go into excessive information seeking, asking others for reassurance so they know what to do? What will you encourage them to do?
So I think that very often people will continue to do this without realizing what they're doing. And so I think information seeking is too neutral of a term, because they're not looking for any information, right? They're looking for good news. They're looking for reassuring information.
That's more accurate. That's more accurate. Yeah.
So part of what's helpful is to realize that we have developed a reassurance-seeking technology called Google, right? And so when we have something that's very uncertain and we're living, with a question in our head, we will go to Google to try to find not just any information, but to try to find a better narrative than the one that we're thinking of, right? So you actually got all the information you needed from the first person you talked to when she told you that your luggage was lost, right? So there it is, it's lost, right? And so
brutal reality, capital letters, it's lost.
Lost. Yes, exactly. There's a whole television show, right? That was based on that very word, right? And most people watching it felt that way. They felt very lost, right? What is going on here? There's a lack of clarity here. And so that word lost was not a satisfying narrative for you, right? And so you were looking for a better narrative to replace it, right? And so that's part of what you're searching for, is another story that's better than this unsatisfying, open-ended story, which is, I don't know, right? Very often the answer the world gives us is, who knows, maybe, right?
Right.
So many things, we live with that as an answer, right? And we're just not satisfied with that. So we go to Google and we look for something else, right? People do it when I have a scratchy throat, and I have this bump on my head. I Google that. What does that mean, right? What can that be? And I'm looking for a narrative, right? Unfortunately, what we find with Google and other places is other narratives that are no more satisfying than the one we started with, and even worse, right? Often because they're constructed by other anxious people, right? Who are worst case scenario thinkers. And so what ends up happening is we get more information, but rather than reassure us, it gives us more to worry about, right? Maybe you find this website that shows, all there's some island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean made up of lost luggage, right? And you see the seagull sitting on your suitcase, right? That's not necessarily a better narrative than, it's lost and maybe it'll show up at some point, right? Who knows, right? So I think it's realizing that what we are looking for with more information is a better story, right? And the solution is not to come up with a better story, because we could make up a better story without Googling, right? We could just think of something really stunning, right? Absolutely, right? I'm sure I'll see my luggage tomorrow morning when I go down for breakfast, right? I'm sure of it, right? And maybe right, exactly. But I don't think it really changes anything, in terms of the real world. So I think it's instead, you're finding a way to open ourselves up to mystery, right? That there's this thing that I don't know, and can I become more comfortable with not knowing? And that can serve us in so many ways, right? It could open the door to you getting a whole new wardrobe, for example, right? Maybe. it allows us to be more creative and to be more flexible, and put in a position to respond better to things as they unfold.
Yeah, yeah. So if I have to share the outcome of this Netflix series,
I'd love to hear it.
like
Yes, what happened?
well, a couple of things. I can tell you that my appreciation for clean clothes, my appreciation for shoes that fit me, went up. Right? Very fast, right? My appreciation for having a backup charger also was there, right? The luggage showed up 4 days later when I was getting ready to leave to the next destination.
So just in time, right?
Just in time, right? But it was, I think, I'm glad that we talk about it, because it really was one of those things that a lot of us go through in life, which is just dealing with these unknown, unexpected, ambiguous, and unplanned situations. And we can expect that the mind will do all types of things to solve the situation, to solve the struggle. And hopefully, right from this conversation, people listening to us can learn skills that are helpful to manage the distress versus perpetuating cycles of worry, right? Which is not taking action or searching a lot for information or searching good news, as you're saying, searching for this good news, this new narrative. Let me switch gears a little bit, if it's okay. So time goes so fast. Here we are, close to the end. And Chad, I'm curious today if you were to have a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, a cup of mushroom coffee, or a delicious scotch or a beer with any person you want today, who will that be and why?
Wow. Okay.
Here we are with that question.
So I'll tell you, I'm going to give you a very roundabout answer, but what this question makes me think a little bit of is, my partner and I have this ongoing discussion. If you could travel in time, if you could have that gift, but you're only allowed to travel to the past or to the future, you can't choose. You can't go back and forth, right? You can go back to the past as many times as you want, or you can go to the future as many times. Which way would you go, right? And it's a very interesting question, because I find people have different answers, and it often reflects their interest in history, right? So my partner often says that he would want to go to the future because he's so curious about how different things will turn out. Do you know what I mean? And he wants to find answers to certain questions, right? That only lie in the future. He says, we know all about the past. There's nothing to be learned from history, right?
That's close.
I know.
That's close with the past.
Different perspective. So I'm a big history buff. I live in the past. I'm nostalgic about the past, even nostalgic about an era before I was alive. And I'm not sure why, but I just feel that that there is. I want to have more of an understanding of the past, and so I would definitely want to talk to a historical figure. Right. Many people come to mind, but the person who popped in my head when you asked the question is Winston Churchill.
Wow.
I'm very interested in World War II. So much of what's going on in the world today is still the fallout from World War II, right? And everything that followed immediately after that. And he was someone who had a really unique perspective on all of that, who was a pivotal figure in the outcome of that conflict. I would just I'd want to know more about his personality and how it's maybe different from what has been handed down to us in his public image, which was very cultivated, right? So I'd want to get a peek behind that facade. But I'd be really interested in hearing just what he thought, not so much about the social political situation, but about us as people, as a world, because he was involved with a fight that the whole world was having with itself in some ways about, sort of who we were, and who we were going to be as human beings, right? And I would just be really interested in sort of hearing his take on humanity in many ways. I just think he is a figure who looms large in recent history. And I think that there's a lot of answers in the past if we look for them, right? And I think so often it kind of fits with our theme of worry. We're looking for answers in the future. We want to know the future, and it will always be unknowable to us. But guess what? The past is available to some extent, right? And that there's actually a lot that we can learn from it, right? And so I would definitely want to talk to someone from the past. And he's one of many figures that comes to mind.
See, that's such a lovely response, Chad. I think you're right that I am curious what he will say. Right? Because yeah, you're right. I didn't grow up in this country, right? But as I, get exposed more to American history and learn about him, I think there is so much this edited version that we have of who he was, right?
Right.
Well, I'm curious who will be behind the scenes, right? Behind the persona that history books are sharing with us today. That's what's
great about your question. It's having coffee. It's an intimate encounter, right?
Yes.
Which is different from hearing someone give a speech, right? You really get more of a feel.
That's right. Just I think there is something different about getting to know people for who they are, not for what they do. Right. I think there's a lot of what we do, but who is the person behind all that doing? I think your conversation with him will tap into that. Well, I hope that in the next conversation with your partner, he can hear this about the richness of going into the past.
I'm going to have him look into this podcast, definitely.
Yes, please. Dear Chad, thank you so much for making the time. For people listening to us, in the show notes of this episode, I will post all of Chad's books. You have a couple of books you have written. You have an upcoming one as well. So I will share that. And is there any other way for people to get access to your work? Do you have your website or Twitter or social media?
Sure. There is a website that I have. It's anxietyhappens.com.
Love the name. I love the name.
And it's really not, I really didn't want a website about me so much, although I do have a page, but I wanted a place where people could go and get information and useful stuff, tools, a few exercises, links to my books, of course, but also a lot of information about acceptance and commitment therapy and cognitive therapy, how they differ from each other and how they can work together. I think they're both very helpful approaches, perspectives that have a lot of overlap, and I think they're very compatible with one another. And so I tried to create a website that was a guide for anxious people to look for tools and interventions that could be helpful. So anxietyhappens.com.
Lovely. I'm sure people listening to us will take a look to the website, especially because I think you do a beautiful job making these research-based skills accessible to people. I absolutely love your book, The Worry Trap. I love the metaphor, the lamp metaphor. The book in OCD looks really, really good and helpful for people who are dealing primarily with mental compulsions or people that are struggling with what, is also known as pure OCD. I think we're talking a lot about mental compulsions again. So I appreciate all the work you have been doing the last couple of years and teaching these skills in a way that is fun, accessible, and great to read. Like I love that. I love the writing style too. So kudos to you and my appreciation for all those resources. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, I will very much appreciate it if you will subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. And if you're feeling extra generous, I welcome a review on Apple Podcasts. Show notes of this episode are in the website playingitsafe.zone. Make sure to subscribe to my newsletter so you can receive more tips to stop all types of unworkable playing it safe actions. See you soon!